Clint Hatton had to rise from the ashes of the tragic death of his 17-year-old son, Gabriel, who was a licensed pilot, killed in a plane crash while living his dream in 2019. Yet, Clint believes that we were created to live a courageous life. He burns with a passion to inspire and help you overcome every obstacle our dynamic world could possibly throw at you.
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Clint Hatton is an author, motivational speaker, personal development and leadership coach, and the founder of Big Bold Brave, based in Dallas, Texas. Clint has been coaching individuals and teams for over 20 years with a proven track record of helping people grow personally, achieve success, and build healthier marriages and relationships. Welcome, Clint.
Hello, Carol. I'm so happy to be with you today. We've been waiting on this a while, so the
Yes.
excitement level is
Yes.
high.
Oh, I agree. And it's funny because I usually book about a year in advance. And this show has been going for 13 years. So it's been wonderful, all the people I meet. And then when I book them,
Yeah.
all of a sudden I realize, who is this person? It's been a while since we
Yeah.
talked, right? But
Yeah,
no,
no
my
kidding.
guests are all handpicked. Believe me, you are very welcome here. And I look forward to an awesome time together. So let us start with your backstory.
Well, thank you for asking. My backstory, it's pretty layered. And anytime I get asked that, I'm always trying to think, okay, how do you pare this down? But, in short, I grew up in sunny Southern California and actually had what I consider to be a very normal life up until probably about the age of 12, and very heavily into sports, of
Mm,
course. Great weather. Love my community. But there were some things that began to happen at 12 that I think certainly had an impact, a long standing impact on just who I became, some of the dysfunctions that I carried for so many years. And it started again at 12. My parents had been married over 25 years, and in short, my dad cheated on my mom, which was devastating to her. Of course, they got married when she was 16. Of course, this was
mm,
back in the day, right? Different generation.
right.
And so she didn't function very well in that season. He had moved out and things got pretty ugly. I lived with her alone because my oldest brother, I only have one sibling. He's almost 8 years older and had already moved out hundreds of miles away. So it was just us. She ended up suffering from what we now phrase as suicidal ideation. Of course, back then I didn't have a term for it. And so she started drinking heavy, tried committing suicide multiple times, twice,
Oh,
almost killed me in the process, once with a speeding car that we were in, and another time with a gun. And so, had some pretty traumatic experiences.
mm,
Well, to fast forward a little bit, it lasted probably about 2 years, this entire season of my life. They eventually got back together and actually ended up married for over 65 years. Both of them passed away about 8 years ago, so they're no longer with me. But we settled our relationship,
mm,
through my early 20s, and I had a great relationship with my parents for many years. But that didn't change the fact that at 12 into 13 years old, I had to go through some things that you just shouldn't. And I'm certainly not the only one. Well, what that led to was
mhm,
faulty coping mechanisms, first of all. So I started drug and alcohol abuse around 13, 14 years old. And that carried with me, for many, many, many
Hmm.
years. And, I was, we've heard the phrase functional alcoholic or
Oh,
functional
right,
drug
right.
abuser. I don't know that there's actual truth to that statement, right? But I think for me, partly because at that age, athletics was important enough to me that it did kind of keep me from going, fully into the ditch, if I could say it that way. But ultimately, by the time I was about 20 years old, I had suffered a couple of catastrophic knee injuries that ended any chance I had of continuing in an athletic career, and really just had no focus, Carol, just
Huh.
no focus at all. And so I got into the car business at 21 years old because I wanted to make money. That's where I was introduced to meth.
Oh, my word.
And over the course of the next 9 years, just abused meth, and pretty much if it didn't involve a needle. Always have hated needles. So, so if it didn't involve a needle, I'm not proud of this fact, but I would try it. But anyway, so 9 years of that. And then at about 30, 31 years old, I made a decision one day. I was like, I'm just tired of this being, a part of my life. And, probably should be dead, to be frank, on many
Right.
different occasions, whether it was, an accidental overdose, which never happened. I don't know how. Um, or just driving, under the influence. I mean, so,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
many ways where I had just had this reckless behavior. But ultimately, I made a decision. I was done and I quit cold turkey. And that was that. I ended up,
Could I just interrupt you
yeah,
for one moment?
absolutely.
Um,
Yeah, please do.
because I think that I'd like you to expound a little more on that. Quitting cold turkey, you made the decision. First of all, your frame of mind certainly was not, well, it was distorted because of the
Right.
addiction, to put it
Yeah, you
mildly,
can say
right?
that. I'm not offended, Carol. You can say it. Tell the truth.
Absolutely. So just expound a little bit more on that, like, because there are people who are in that position, even possibly listening to this show. So how did you really make that decision and stick with it?
Yeah, well, it's an important question, and I don't mind you asking it. I want before I answer it my way, I do want to be sensitive though, because to your point, there may be some people that are fighting that right now that are listening to this, and I do want to make one quick distinction because this was in early 1990. And it's not that meth was healthy back then. It was very destructive. I know a lot of people who, died, or I shouldn't say I know a lot of people. I
Hmm.
know there was people
Right.
who died from it. And I did have many friends that couldn't, quit the addiction, and their lives went nowhere and rotted out teeth and everything else. So it's not like, again, it was a safe substance, but the stuff today is far worse
Oh,
as
wow.
well.
Wow.
And so I would, anybody listening to this saying I quit cold turkey, that is not my endorsement of this is how you should tackle it. I think you should get any possible help whatsoever that is necessary to help you, to break that addiction, and professional help is probably going to be a part of that. But my story is my story, and I wouldn't
Right.
change it.
Hmm.
And so I think, part of it was I'd been through some stuff, and I was just so fed up
Hmm.
with just going nowhere. There's a certain rhythm to life when you're abusing meth where you literally spend hours and hours and hours, or at least this was the case for me, even waiting to buy it. I remember so many times, like maybe a Friday night, hey, we're going to go out and go to this party or whatever. And then I'd find myself sitting in front of some drug dealer's house for hours on end,
Hmm.
waiting to get this stuff,
Wow.
and sometimes not even ever actually going out to do the thing that I had said I intended to do. And just being in dangerous situations. There's just so many layers to that. But I just got so fed up, Carol, with that being just my lifestyle. And I wanted
Hmm.
something different. And so, again, I think today, if you have a serious meth addiction or any other kind of drug or alcohol addiction, you do, seriously need to consider bringing in professional help. But I will also say, and I'm kind of a neuroscience geek. Now, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to, get into the weeds with medical jargon. But we do know now with brain science that the stories that we tell ourselves about who we are and who we want to
Right.
become
Right.
are very powerful. And so I would say this to you, Carol, even though I can't remember the phrase you used, um, I was a bit of a mess, right? A bit of a mess, but I did make what I now characterize, and it's kind of branding for me, to be totally honest, but courageous decision. I made a courageous decision that I wanted my life to change. I just decided the type of person that I want to be. And I started taking steps that took me in that direction. Now, that was, 25 plus years ago, probably 30 years
Right.
ago
Right.
now. So I would certainly like to think I'm
That's old.
eons beyond where that guy was, right? And it's true. Sometimes I tell the story, to be honest with you, and it sounds like I'm making it up or telling somebody else's story because it's so far removed. But it's just a real part of my journey. And so I
Absolutely.
think I think there's something very, very, very powerful and real about deciding who you want to become and then kind of cutting the cord. So real quick, I'll say this too. I also cut off any of those relationships
Yes.
that I knew would
Right.
draw me back in
Right.
as well. So I made some practical decisions as well that certainly served me well.
All right. Thank you. Now, do you remember where you were in your story? If you'd like to continue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So ultimately, and I think what I'm about to tell you, I believe is a part of it. I am a man of faith. I'm a Christian, and up to this point, I was not. I was not raised in church or anything like that. For us, it was you'll relate to this because I think we're of the basically the same or pretty close to the same generation. As for us, you used to always have to fill out a form for school or whatever, and the forms were much simpler back then. You didn't have 50 genders and
Right. Oh,
25
no
religions,
kidding.
and
Sorry.
it was you're a Protestant or you're a Catholic. I mean, that was kind
That's
of like
it. You're right. I remember that.
Oh, totally. And so we would always check the box Protestant because we weren't Catholic. And that was about it. There was really no substance behind that. Just you had to choose one or the other. They didn't have other back in those days, or I probably would have, clicked that box. So I say that to say, I didn't have this like, lifestyle of growing up in any kind of, religious way or anything like that. But during this season of me even quitting meth, just shortly after making that decision, actually, I was involved in a network marketing company. It was a nutritional company. So I'd begun to take my health more serious too. And through that, had some relationships. And my upline, for those who are familiar with that kind of jargon in the network marketing world, was someone who I just knew there was something different about them, Carol. The best way I can describe it is I got to know them very well. They were very successful, but they also had life issues too, like we all do, right? We all face
Hmm.
stuff. And the one thing I noticed about them is they always seemed to have what I would characterize as peace. Now, I didn't really have that terminology back then, but they just always seemed to have peace and have hope, right? That things were going to turn
Hmm.
out in their favor. And I struggled with that. And so I went to church with them one day after them asking me, I don't know how many times. I was living in Northern California at this point, Redding, California. And that day I made a decision that I was going to have a relationship with God. For me, that's Jesus. And it really began, and I'm going to say it that way very intentionally. It began to set me on a new course. Now, I still
Hmm.
had tons of baggage, tons of issues. I'm still far from a perfect human being, to say the least. But it began another addition of having just a different mindset, a different moral compass,
Right.
if I could
Right.
say that, and a different compass in terms of wanting to contribute to the world and have my part to play in making the world a better place for those I encounter. So those things all kind of collided around that same time, around 31 years old. So I believe it, and I'm not trying to make any kind of theological statements here, But I do believe that even though I had not accepted a relationship with God when I made that decision to quit meth, I believe that he was already working in my heart at that time.
Hmm. You have no idea how much I appreciate what you just shared. That really touched my heart in many different
Mhm.
ways, and I thank you for sharing that with the audience. What happened in 2020? Our world was turned upside down September 23rd, 2019, but the entire world was turned upside down in 2020. Please expound on that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, we told enough of my origin story, but I'll just frame it with this. I ended up ultimately meeting my bride of over 20 years. We had three boys. Life was good, Carol, and we had ups and downs like anybody else. We did suffer a miscarriage. Two of our three boys were born prematurely, including our youngest, who was born 3 months early at 1 pound, 14 ounces in the
Oh,
hospital for
wow.
2.5 months. So we have been through some stuff like most human beings do, right? But September 23rd is a whole different level of that kind of experience in life, and that involved my oldest son. So he was extraordinary, and he's going to come into play, probably in some of the next parts of our conversation. But
Okay.
he was just a courageous young man. He was one of those kids that I like to say he was very verbal from a very early age. I
Hmm.
mean, gifted with communication, which, had its ups and downs depending on what was going on. It was uh, it was an interesting ride with him because he had very strong opinions from the time he was very little. But ultimately, at about 8, he decided he wanted to become a pilot. He never let go of it. And when he was in high school, he began to get some opportunities for that to actually take place, which we felt was, again, as a believer in particular, we felt like it was God's favor and miraculous to some degree because we didn't have the money, and yet somehow he was able to work it out, and he became a pilot. He actually flew solo at 16 years old before he even had his
Oh,
driver's
my
license.
word.
Yeah. Yeah, which is crazy when you say it. And then at 17, which is the youngest you can be to actually become a licensed pilot, he did exactly that. He passed, all the exams and the check rides and everything necessary for that to happen. And he became a licensed pilot. And we were just living the dream in September of 2019 and just thought, you know, everything was just going our way, Carol. It's just how we felt. And then one day, and it was September 23rd, as you said, he jumped in a plane. It was just an ordinary day. He was flying a friend up to Arkansas, which we live in North Texas, so it's a couple hours of flight up to Fayetteville, Arkansas, to drop her off at school. She attended school there, and he did that, dropped her off safely. Then he jumped back in his plane and was headed back home. And about 20 minutes on his return flight, he went through some pretty heavily wooded, hilly areas, and an unexpected weather system came through. And when that happened, he lost his horizon and he ended up crashing into the side of the mountain
Oh, my
and lost
word.
his life. And so to say our world was turned upside down, there's never a great way to say it. There's no way to
Exactly.
describe it, but in an instant, that's exactly what took place. We started a journey we never asked for. I remember even the morning of, my two other sons were at that time 14 and 9. So my middle was just starting his freshman year of high school. And they had, I won't take you, through that night, Carol, because it was a very long,
Oh, no kidding.
confusing
Wow.
night. We
Wow.
we actually got the original call at about 8 p.m. that we knew he had disappeared, but we didn't officially know until about 3:30 a.m. that he was indeed gone. And so, it was a hellish night, and we did not wake our boys up for that. We didn't want them to, have to go through any of
Hmm.
that stuff that we were going through. So the next morning I had to sit and talk with them. And this is where, I think a decision was made that has really been the best way I've learned to describe it is like a compass, something that continues to help
Hmm.
us just calibrate in a
Hmm.
certain
Hmm.
direction. And that was, I don't think I said this part earlier. I had become a pastor, so I was a pastor for over 17 years during this part of my life. And the only reason why I think that's even important is just because the type of work that I did, I helped a lot of people that have gone through some really difficult challenges, traumas, and in some case, losing a loved one and even a child, to death. And so I'd had some experience with that. And I knew that if we didn't find a way to frame it, and this will make sense in a minute. I don't want to confuse anybody here, but if we didn't frame it correctly, I just knew how bad things can get. I've seen marriages implode. I've seen families just fall apart in the face of tragedy. And so that framing was just simply this, Carol. I said, Gabriel was courageous. He lived life to the fullest. He also taught himself guitar. He was an amazing photographer that had some incredible opportunities with that. He graduated a year early. I mean, he lived life, Carol.
Aw,
And so I told the boys that morning, I said, we can't honor him and we can't even honor God if our focus for the rest of our lives is going to be revolving his death and how
exactly.
he died
Yes.
and being trapped in that. I said, so there's a second choice. And that second choice is we're going to choose to move forward, focusing on how he lived. Now, I'm willing to go anywhere you want to go with this, but I'll just throw this out immediately for our listeners. It's been 4 years. It has not been an easy road. We have done none of it
Right.
perfectly. We've had ups and downs. We've had many tears. We've had challenging times that have challenged our faith, since that has happened. We've been angry at different times that this had to be a part of our story. So all those things still come into play. You still have to live this out. But I do stand on the fact, especially after doing so many of these interviews, frankly, and then just meeting and helping a lot of people over the last several years, that decision was huge. And it definitely has been something that has helped us. Again, I use the word recalibrate because life continues to punch you in the mouth in certain ways and different things. Like you said, COVID hit 3 months later. So that's a whole other story. But we just made that decision, Carol, that we were going to choose to honor the way he lived by living our lives courageously.
You can make a courageous decision. I love that. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, we want to talk about your book and also some coping strategies that you have for the audience. So we'll be right back.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another. Gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
Welcome back to Never Ever Give Up Hope. We're chatting with Clint Hatton today, and his story has definitely touched my heart, and I am sure that it is touching yours as well. We were talking about the loss of his son and the tragedy of that, and now how this affected him, his family, his life, and what he learned through that experience that can have an impact for you as well. So, my question to you is this: how do you not allow fear, loss, or anything else that life throws at you, but instead you are a carrier of hope, living your dream, love that, and choosing to find a way to love and serve others along the way?
Yeah, thank you for asking me that question. And it's obviously a little bit layered too, right? There's no one
Of
thing
course.
or this perfect, ABC formula, but I do believe that not only have I learned a few key things that have helped us tremendously, but I think there are things that help any human being. And we really already talked about one, and that is first you have to make the decision.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't make a decision that, okay, I want to live courageously, you don't have to use that word, but I want to live the type of life where I have an impact. I want to help others. If you haven't made that decision, then you're probably not going to get very far. So, I think when we talk about my story, obviously up to this point, before Gabriel passed away, I had been helping people. I've been pastoring for 17 years, speaking, doing all that kind of stuff. So it's not so much, Carol, that, I made this radical pivot, but I think what it did, what Gabriel's death did for me, and I'm saying that very intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I'm going to back myself up just for a second so no one misconstrues what I'm saying.
Okay.
I don't believe at all that this thing happened to me so that I could become a certain
Yes.
kind of person. I
Yes.
don't believe that at
Yes.
all. But I do believe things happen to all of us, and how we respond to that is going to dictate where we go. So if I could frame it with that first. So, however, that being said, losing your oldest son is devastating. And so what I felt I got from him, if I could say it that way, is he just seemed to have no fear. Now, I know he had to have fear, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we all fight fear, but you just wouldn't know it based on his choices. And you wouldn't know it based on the actions that he took to live an adventurous life. We've talked about him becoming a pilot, which is obviously a big deal, but that wasn't the only area of his life that he was that
Right.
way. And so for me, I began to really just take a hard look at my life. And I realized, and I say this actually in my book, that there were pockets where I was a coward. I
Mm.
thought about launching a coaching business for years, but just never had the courage to do it. I'd thought about, and I'd been encouraged to write a book for 15 plus years easily, and, never had the courage. And so, that was one thing that his death did for me, was I began to realize, okay, none of us, we all know this consciously, but none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. You and I aren't guaranteed after we get off this call. None of us are guaranteed anything.
Of course.
And I felt like I was just a former athlete. So here's a little sports thing, but I felt like I was leaving things on the field, right? I wasn't playing the game the way I was meant to play it. And so that made me begin to make choices that I had not before. And so along with that, because these things were happening all at the same time, is COVID hit 3 months later after he passed away. And, we got a year and a half into that. And again, this is not a political statement. It doesn't matter who I've talked to in the last couple of years, whether they're left leaning, right leaning, it doesn't matter. Everyone agrees that fear got unleashed on our planet on
Yes.
a scale of
Yes.
which we've never seen before,
Exactly.
right? We
Yes.
can all agree on that. And so I got frustrated, is probably the kindest way to say it. I got really angry with the degree of fear and how it was
Mm-hmm.
causing so many people that I knew, let alone people you hear about and read about, to stop living, to really stop dreaming, stop living, not even see family, and all these different things that
Exactly.
happened
Yes.
during that time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so, most people would agree, I would have said the same thing. To start writing a book that involved my son's story only 2 years after losing him was very early, and I'm very aware of that. Um, I wrote it because I felt compelled, that I
Mm-hmm.
knew there were things in his story, and ultimately our story as a family,
Yes.
that there was a resilience factor that we had chosen and that we were living out. There were, you asked me, how do you fight fear? Well, I didn't coin this phrase. Anybody will know that the second I say it. Eating fear for breakfast. Don't know who to give credit for, for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a catchy phrase. Someone made it up a long time ago. But I like that phrase and I use it because that's what eating fear is like. It's like breakfast because it happens every day. There's not a day where we don't have to overcome some sort of fearful thought. right? They're not all equal. Some are not as debilitating or crippling, but we all fight fear. We've, fear of whether or not we're going to be liked, fear of whether or not that something we're doing is significant, fear of, getting on a plane for us, after the crash. There's lots of options, right? I mean, fear comes
Exactly.
in many
Yes.
faces, but it starts with this idea that I'm not going to let it stop me from living my life. So that's ultimately why I ended up writing the book when I did. And I want to get off the book because we're not here to try and sell my book. That's not the point of this call. But I want to say this much about it. I knew I wasn't going to write a classical book on grieving. Yes,
Okay.
I do talk about some of the processes that we have lived by, and I'm saying that intentionally as well. It's not just theory; it's things we've done.
Hmm.
That have definitely helped us in the grieving process. And now, the book's been out for a while. It's helped a lot of people, but it goes way beyond that. And it really goes beyond that into what is your mindset about life and how do you respond to the challenges that you face? Because there's many forms of loss, right? Not
Right.
everyone, thank God, is going to experience losing a child, but many have. But whatever form of loss, I actually ironically just had breakfast with a friend of mine right before we got on this call, whose 40 something year old wife has had a series of just awful strokes over the last few
Oh,
years, and they didn't think she was going to make it. And just the life that they're living, that he right now, she's alive, but he's suffering loss
of
because
course. Yes.
that friend, that
Yes.
best friend, that beautiful human being right now doesn't function that way anymore, right? And so, I just knew when I wrote this book that there's a lot of forms of loss, and that I could just be one small part in helping some people not give in to crippling fear. So that's kind of how I ended up on this new journey. If I could just say, it's not so much that I had this new passion to help people, I would say it was just put on steroids, because another thing that I believe, death can do for you if you allow it, is that it increases your compassion for other people.
Right.
I'm not near as quick
Right.
to judge
Yes.
people the way
Yes.
that I did before. Someone's cutting you off on the road, or someone's being rude to you in person. I'm just not as quick to react to that kind of thing anymore, because I just have this tendency to remember that, there's more to this story, and I have no idea what this person is going through,
Hmm.
that may have led to that behavior. So, but to get back to your question, that's what launched me on this passion. I just want to help people. I just want to help
Right.
people.
Right. I get it.
So I want to throw out just a couple of very practical things, because I'm sure there's people listening to this and will listen to this that have suffered a trauma. And, feeling your emotions is probably the number one thing that I could encourage someone to do today. And there's other things, you can get therapy. You need people in your life that you can talk to. Um, for me, turning again what was a tragic situation, and really that affected the rest of our lives, because we'll never have him back, right, on this side. um, but using even his story to help people and change people's lives. And he's been an inspiration to so many people that have learned about his story and what he did in the short time that he had.
Mm.
So I think you can call that giving your pain a purpose. There's other ways to say it. So those are all things that have been very healing for me. But actually embracing real emotions through the grieving process, which, by the way, we are still in. And I
Of
believe
course.
we will
Yes.
always be in. There
Hmm.
will always be a layer of that. Was huge. And it started very early. And that was one of the things I told my other boys that morning was, we don't know how it's going to hit. We don't know when it's going to hit. Triggers are everywhere, but we are going to feel whatever it is, and it's okay. And we're going to do it together. We're going to do it publicly, meaning not putting ourselves on a platform or trying to even do this, but just we're going to be open and real about what we're facing. So sometimes that meant crying. and we've cried many tears. Sometimes that's been laughter. Carol, he was an amazing guy. So we have lots of fond
Yes.
memories and fun stories and things that he did that were quirky or even dumb, or whatever, And so sometimes that's laughter. Sometimes it's anger. We don't make a habit of cursing in our home. And for me, that's not even a religious thing. To me, it's more of a, I may offend somebody here, but I just think there's a more intelligent way to talk than that being, a heavy part of your
Hmm.
command on the English language, right? If I could say that. But I even told my boys, at that morning and on the days and weeks and years ahead that, listen, if you get so angry and even a curse word comes out, you need to know there's no punishment. It's okay. We're just going to
Right,
process.
right, right.
We're going to process. And so we've done all of that. And we've had lots of days where things have gone very, very well. And we've had some days where it's harder. And not every day is a good day. But again, keeping just that mindset, and I don't want to overuse that word, but it really is just the way you think about your life and the way you think about where you want your story to go. We keep that in front of us, and that's allowed us, in my case, to be able to help people through my coaching, through the speaking, through my book. My wife is an artist, and her art and the way she goes about her thing is incredible. What it does for people, it's very healing as well. And then both my other sons, one's in at Oklahoma State University right now pursuing his business degree. That's his version of, I know I haven't used the phrase big, bold, brave much, but living big, bold, brave, which is our family mantra. And my youngest, he's working on his second degree black belt. He's super smart, taking, high level classes and just killing it in school. And, we attack life, but that doesn't mean we don't have to fight fear. We all have to fight fear.
You said so many things that they're all bumper sticker moments, and they're awesome. And I mean, we could take one and just dissect it, and I appreciate everything that you said. I also appreciate the that you are sharing practical steps in dealing with grief and life in general.
Yeah.
And I like to think myself as being the most practical person in the world because, and so I was totally related to what you said in so many ways, and I thank you for that. In conclusion, what would you like? I mean, basically, you've summed it up already, but anything else in conclusion you would like to say to the audience?
Well, one thing, we didn't talk about this before. One thing I'd like to do for your listeners, because, there are time restraints and we could go on all day with different layers of,
Exactly.
my story and even your story and how it relates to your life and the things you've been through. But I do want to offer what we can do this probably on your website link.
Okay.
I'll send you a link to my free guide. It's 5 steps in
Perfect.
how to make
Perfect.
courageous decisions, because I do think, again, I'm not talking ABC formula per se, but I do think that there are components to a mindset and the way you approach life and challenges that will definitely serve you well. So I want to give that to the listeners. So let's do
Oh,
that for sure.
absolutely. Okay.
Um, but I think the other thing I just want to leave people with, and we're talking about never giving up hope, right? That's the purpose of this podcast, and the beautiful work that you're doing is you cannot do that alone. You can't do it alone. And so, as a family, we've grown very tight, as you have probably guessed and can imagine. Our family's tighter than it's ever been, but we've also embraced other people who live these same values. And I think that's an
Yes.
important
That's good.
distinction.
That's good.
We it's not like we kicked people out of our life, but we began to prioritize the ones that we spend the most time with, the ones that we'll allow in our inner circle, the ones we'll allow to speak into our lives. We tighten that down dramatically going through this experience. And so this is a critical piece for everybody listening. And if you don't have someone today, because I recognize that could be the case, you've got to find a way. You've got to reach out, maybe contact someone like you, Carol, a coach. And I mean, I know it sounds like, gosh, I have to hire somebody, but if that's what it takes, yes,
That's right.
draw somebody into your life that can give you some uplift, right? Breathe some life into you, hear what your dreams are, listen to you cry, whatever it is that you need. You can't do this thing alone. It's going to require, and I like to use the word collaboration, it's going to require collaborating with other people, that you help them, they help you, and we're all better off because of it. And so I just want to leave that as an encouragement to anybody out there who's really struggling for any reason. Do whatever it takes. Hire somebody. Go, if it's for you, if it's a faith thing and it's church, man, start joining some groups, and meet people. Do whatever you can to surround yourself with some people that are going to live by the values that you value.
Wow. You had a lot of more of those bumper sticker moments in there. Oh my goodness, there's so many. And thank you for also sharing the practical steps that we can download. And again, thank you so much for being on Never Ever Give Up Hope. You definitely are the poster boy for that. I appreciate that you've been there, you've done that, and you're coming out and helping others as a result. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carol. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.